So I don't get.
Awesome. Hello everyone and welcome to today's Alumni Spotlight here with Mary Schwab. I'm Emma, first of all, who's on Team Designlab. I'm our admissions and communications lead. And here we've got Mary today, who took our UX Academy program a couple of years ago now, and she's here to tell you all about how she came across the program, what she felt about it, what she did before, what she did after, all lots of different insights to help you navigate, your own career, but also learn all the insights that she's got to share. Thank you so much for saying hi in the chat already. As you noticed, you have got a chat tab and a questions tab. Do feel free, like a lot of people have been, to say hi in the chat. Any specific questions that you want me to ask Mary in the Q&A session, please do put those specifically in the questions tab. I won't be able to see them in the chat tab because they'll be amongst lots of other stuff, I imagine. But yeah, so any questions specifically in the questions tab, and then we will ask Mary those once we've got through a few sort of initial pieces of conversation. So first of all, welcome Mary. It's so lovely to have you online with us today to learn about your background and your story and what you're doing now. I just want to give you first of all the opportunity to introduce yourself, and then we can get going with a few questions.
Cool. Thanks, Emma. Yeah, thanks for having me today. So I am a Designlab graduate. I was in the Proxima cohort. So I graduated about a year ago. I took the part-time track, and after Designlab, I was a UX designer at Camping World for a while, and most recently moved into research, and I'm a UX researcher at National Geographic Learning.
Awesome. Yeah, I know that it must be super interesting to be working at National Geographic Learning. I'm very excited to get stuck into some of that. But first of all, I just want to ask you sort of, what were you doing before UX Academy, and how did that sort of come about? Like, how did you end up moving into the UX UI industry?
Yep. So I come from a digital marketing background. That's pretty much what I did straight out of college for many, many years. I worked in client service account management at a company called Rakuten Advertising for like 7 years. So I was helping big apparel brands manage their digital marketing campaigns, more specifically affiliate marketing, which is all about driving like new customers and brand awareness. And so I did that for many years. It was a great job. It was a great company, but I just wasn't in it anymore in my head and my heart. And I just wanted, I guess working in client service, if anybody has experience in this, they probably also feel that you're always working for somebody else. At the end of the day, you're not making any decisions for yourself. You're presenting data and opportunities, but at the end of the day, I didn't really own any of that stuff. And it was out of my hands once I presented it or made my recommendation. So I just really wanted a career where I was actively building things and working on things and making decisions from start to finish. So that's kind of one reason I started exploring UX. I also, in my day-to-day job, kind of got frustrated with some systems that I had to work with. And I always wondered, why is this so hard? Why do I have so many Post-it notes all over my desk telling me don't click that button or pull this report instead of this report, or having to take a million reports and put them together? And I realized why that was. So I thought, well, that's interesting. How might, we make these kinds of things better for people in their day-to-day? So, and then finally, I just knew that if I was going to make a career change, I wanted to, do something more tech focused. I mean, obviously tech's a great place to be, but because of my client service background, I do love talking to people and making human interactions. So I knew I didn't necessarily want to be just like a programmer or an engineer just behind my computer all day. So because of those reasons, UX was just kind of like a good fit for me.
Yeah, no, that completely makes sense. I'm sure a lot of people watching, as well as anyone else watching this at any point, can really resonate with that. We do see a lot of students sort of reaching out to us saying that they're enjoying their current job, but it's not that fulfilling. There's they really want to be solving problems for people and really sort of making a difference, in their day-to-day work. So I think a lot of people could definitely resonate with you there. And we actually also get a lot of people who, they want to work in tech, and they originally look at software engineering programming and then think, oh no, that's not really quite what I had in mind, and then sort of find out about UX a little bit after. So I think that's a very, very common path, that people go through. Awesome. So how did you then learn about Designlab, and sort of how did you end up enrolling in our courses, from that point?
Yeah, so truthfully, I did take a General Assembly course first in Chicago. It was a 40-hour, so a short course in UX design, just to like dip my toe, just to make sure it was something that I really did like. So that was just like a couple nights after work for maybe 6 or 8 weeks. So I did that first just to understand if I would like UX, and I loved it. So then I knew, okay, I needed to do something a little bit more extensive. I was working. I didn't want to have to quit my job to go back to school full time. So I just found Designlab just based on my own research. It was, like I said, I could keep my job while still going back to school. The part-time track was very enticing for me because of that reason. The fact that it was all online, so I didn't have to go into a building. Although that might have been nice sometimes, but the fact I could do it, I could log a couple hours before I went to work, or, check in on some things on my lunch, it was just like very flexible for me. And then honestly, just like cost wise, comparing it to other programs, it was just more in my budget.
Yeah, no, that's completely fair. I think it's really important to validate whether this is the right industry for you before, going full on with a boot camp and investing in that regard. So it totally makes sense. We do see people sort of taking either like something on General Assembly or Coursera or LinkedIn Learning or other, Udemy or other smaller platforms where they can just try it out a little bit. And I think that this is obviously after your time as a Designlab student, but we've now obviously got our foundations course, which is kind of like that. So it's, it's just like a little baby course that you can take before making the bigger decision about UX Academy. So, we have all that going on as well. And when you were in UX Academy, like sort of in a nutshell, how did you find the course? You mentioned that the part-time track worked well for you, but I just wondered sort of like, what was your favorite thing about it? What was maybe your least favorite thing about it? Like any sort of insights that you can share about your experience in general?
I think some of my favorite, I'll start with my least favorite part maybe was, phase one just moves a little bit slower, because that's like when you're getting your toolkit and everybody's kind of working on, there's 3 project prompts. So everybody's kind of working on the same projects, which is great in a lot of ways. But because I had a little bit of UX experience beforehand, I was like super antsy. So I thoroughly enjoyed phase 1, but phase 2, I like absolutely loved, because I felt like I was working for myself, because you have your 3 capstone projects and there are prompts, but you can also choose your own adventure and come up with your own projects. So once I was working on my capstones, I was like, this is cool. I'm doing this all on my own. I'm deciding what research I want to do. I'm deciding what tools I want to pull from phase 1 that I learned. So I thought that was really cool how it was set up. So it was like, first half is more like school, like your kind of typical school setup where you're doing lots of readings and applying concepts. But then phase 2, it's like, go be free, be on your own, which I really loved. I'm a Group Crit Facilitator, so I obviously did love group crits every week. I looked forward to them. The first couple were a little bit nerve-wracking just because it's like, I'd never done that before. But I think just like seeing what other people are working on and getting inspiration from them and, learning from feedback on other people's projects is just as valuable as when I was presenting and people were giving me feedback. So that was like my week of almost therapy, where I was like, okay, there are other students here who are having the same highs and lows that I am. And I always felt a million times better after group crits. So
yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, on that, I was going to bring that up a bit later, but feel free to sort of segue into that if you want now. So yeah, so Mary is one of our awesome Group Crit facilitators, and for anyone who doesn't know what that feature of UX Academy is, so it's a group call that you'd be sort of participating in on a weekly basis, which is led by one of our facilitators like Mary, and it's an opportunity for students to share work they've been doing recently and get feedback and critique from one another, and just have sort of a group environment where feedback is shared verbally in that sense. And so yeah, Mary, do you want to just share a little bit about what you found so sort of good about group crits, both as a student and now as a group crit facilitator, and sort of what you think the benefits are of them?
Yeah, definitely. So the benefit of group crits is definitely learning to value constructive criticism, because there's always going to be somebody who has comments about your work, especially in the design field. So, and that's fine. And there's so many times when somebody else might be right about something. So just learning to be okay with somebody just challenging what you're doing, which is great. Also, just getting comfortable presenting. I'm lucky that my background in client service, I was literally presenting every day in my job and talking to clients and having to be on. So maybe that's why group crits were a little bit easier for me, because I was used to talking all the time and being challenged by clients. So, but for people who come from a background where maybe they don't do that much presenting, it's a really great practice to be like, okay, here's what I'm working on very quickly. Here's what I need feedback on, and kind of getting to the point, because we never have, you'll never be in an instance usually where you can literally talk about every little piece of your project. So yeah, it's just great practice in general. And then as a group crit facilitator, it's fun for me to just like stay connected to what students are working on right now. Like we've said, I'm more in a research field now, so I'm not in Figma every day. So it kind of helps keep me fresh as well, in terms of like specific designing things, rather than research. So it keeps me fresh and keeps me on my toes, definitely, so that I don't like forget some of those key concepts from design.
Yeah. Awesome. We've actually got some really sweet and quite funny comments in the chat here about this. So Courtney mentioned that she was in one of your group crit sessions this weekend. She was great. So thank you for sharing that, Courtney. And Alexander mentioned that he's happy that his school and class presentations, which he used to hate, will finally have value. So I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. Also, we've also had a few questions asking things about your experience in UX Academy. One of them from Marta, who asks, did you do any real world client projects for your Capstone projects, and why or why not did you make that decision?
Yes, so for the website redesign, which I believe was Capstone 1, I worked with my hairstylist. So he's like my friend. He's been doing my hair for like 10 years. So, he's amazing, but he doesn't, his website is not his number one priority, right? Like, he has a big client base. That's where we go to book, but like it could use some work. So I kind of politely approached him and said, hey, I'm doing this thing and I'd love to, help you out and like maybe design a new website for you. And he was all on board. So I had him as my real world client, which was great. Yeah, so I definitely think it's well worth it to try to find like a small business or a friend or family member who could use some website work to use in one of your projects.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I'm going to use that in chats to students moving forward. Mary worked on it with her hairstylist. That is a great example, because I think, people, initially think they're going to struggle to find these opportunities, but I think you have to just like take a minute, think a little bit outside the box, and realize there's an awful lot of people that, like you mentioned, haven't got time to work on their website or their app, and they really could just do with the support, especially at a time like this. I think over the past year with everything going on, people have been even more keen to get a little bit of help here and there. So that makes complete sense. And on the note of your part-time track, so Krista has asked, did you find working full-time and doing the boot camp part-time manageable?
So I was very lucky in that I had been at my company Rakuten for 7 years. And so I approached them and told them I wanted to do this boot camp. So I asked to go like part-time at work. I was more than part-time. I was maybe doing like 30 hours a week. So I was able to cut back on my Rakuten work a little bit to help give me more time for Designlab. So my moral of that story is, I know that's not an option for everybody, but always ask, because you never know. And I put together, again, this whole presentation on why, what job I could do at Rakuten for 30 hours a week and why it was beneficial to them and why it was beneficial to me. And they said yes. So just keep that in mind too, that there are other options besides full-time work, part-time Designlab.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. I think it's always worth asking. They can only say no. So you might as well ask, and just see what happens. Awesome. So we've got quite a few questions coming in about sort of what happened after UX Academy, which was definitely something that we want to chat about. So, what happened after you graduated? Like, how did the career services portion go? And like, how did you end up at getting your first job? Any insights you can share around that would be awesome.
Yep. So, I was not in career services that long, maybe 4 or 5 weeks. But I had, while I was in UX Academy, I obviously did a lot of networking, and I had been put in touch with a local UX designer here in Chicago who worked at Camping World. And so him and I just had a couple of calls here and there, and I had him review some of my portfolio for feedback, and I just kept in touch with him. And then in June of last year, he reached out and said they were going to be hiring a UX designer. So he could definitely help me get a referral, and I pretty much could get like that first initial interview with his referral. So I will say that I probably would have never gotten that interview at Camping World without him. I think referrals are like extremely important. And obviously I ended up getting that job, which was really great. So I would say, yeah, networking is key, definitely. So I was at Camping World as a UX designer from then until about December of last year. It was really great experience, but it was not a good long-term fit for me. So I kind of had my eyes open late last year just to see what other opportunities were out there. And I was then put in touch with National Geographic Learning as a UX researcher. And that's how I ended up there.
Awesome. And we've got a question from Alexander actually on that note, who said sort of what was the main reason for like going down the research route, and what do your days at Nat Geo Learning look like now that you are a UX researcher?
Yeah, I think, so I don't come from a design or creative background. So one thing when I was going through UX Academy, I guess I should have mentioned in your question earlier, but when I would see some other, there's a lot of people with like graphic design backgrounds, and when you see their high fidelity designs, I was like, oh my God, my stuff is never gonna look like that. So I was always like super intimidated because some things are just like absolutely amazing that they put together. So anyway, I always knew I was definitely more focused and felt more comfortable and enjoyed the research, kind of like the beginning stages of design more so than the UI portion. So I wasn't actively looking for a research position, but this one kind of like came to me, and I'm also a tutor in Chicago. So the fact that I was, taking my UX skills and working in education was very enticing for me. And I think it was also enticing for the Nat Geo team, because I haven't yet, but I will eventually be interviewing students, running usability testing with students like K through 12. So they wanted to be able to hire somebody who knows how to talk to kids and work with them, because they're wild.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I used to be a science teacher actually, so I totally get that. Like talking to kids and interacting with them is something that you either have experience in, are like a natural affinity for, or not necessarily so much. Yeah. But I think it's a really good example, because I think we get a lot of people sort of coming in wondering, am I too late into my career to transition? Like, what about my background? Like, is it going to be, am I able to use what I've already done? But I think you've got a really good example there. Like, sometimes even the most random skills are actually really relevant to your future role, and there will always be transferable stuff that you can pull over. So I wondered if you had any insights into how to sort of analyze your past, work experience or experience in general, and how you pulled that through to interview and into your portfolio, etc.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think there's any career you can come from that you won't be able to pull from. I know, like, when you first start out in UX, it might not seem very evident, but literally every experience you have will somehow fit into the design thinking process. So for me, it was always problem solving and working with clients and difficult clients. That was really key. Like I could talk about that till I'm like blue in the face. So being able to present to somebody and have them challenge what you're saying, there, you know, that's a very real world design thing that will happen in your career. Working in teams and analyzing data is also something that I talked about a lot in my interviews, because, you know, data-driven design is also like very important. We don't just design things because we think they look good. We design things because they work. So being able to like look at data and try to make decisions based on that as well was something that I could also pull from a lot. But yeah, just like talking to people and like being able to communicate your ideas thoroughly, and I think is also like something I pulled from a lot.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And we had a few people mention and also question like, oh, you know, I'm planning to transition mid-career, like from healthcare or something completely seemingly unrelated. But I think that just shows that there really are so many things that you can pull across. Like we really do have such, like if you look at the backgrounds of our graduates, they are so broad. Like there's people from all different walks of life and different backgrounds and work experience and positions in life and everything. So I don't think you should ever write yourself off for that. So yeah, that's awesome. There was a question that I had that was really good. It says, oh, here we go. So Julia's asked, now that you're working solely as a UX researcher, do you feel that the UX research portion would have adequately prepared you for your job rather than the whole of the UX Academy program?
Yeah, I mean, I felt pretty prepared. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think when you run through your 3 capstones, you're doing all your own research. So I was able to speak to that a lot. Like, you know, I decided what research tactics to use, why I wanted to use them, and then I actually did them. So I think having, well, I mean, technically you do 4 projects, but definitely in phase 2, where you're kind of in control of those 3 projects, I was more than prepared to talk about research, and felt comfortable performing my own research because I did work on it all by myself, which is not necessarily a true representation of how you might work on research in your job, in your career. But yeah, I felt like totally prepared to speak to all of that.
And do you think, you know, obviously because you have navigated down into the UX research side of things, because that's where you felt like you're sort of more aligned to anyway, and that's sort of obviously where the opportunity came from. But do you think sort of having knowledge and experience with the wider UX design process is still helpful to you? Like, is it, you know, knowing what's going to happen from your research and all that type of stuff, is that beneficial context?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. While I'm not in like Figma every day anymore, I'm still always working on projects that you know, I guess I'm not always talking to people. Like right now I'm starting a project where we're going to switch something in the navigation. So I have to do some research around key patterns, best practices around navigational patterns and things like that, which I think is very design focused rather than research focused. So yeah, still not actively designing, but I still have to think about design principles all the time. And like the UX designers will also come to me and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing it this way or that way. What do you think? So that's also a good way to stay involved.
100%. Yeah, I think we sort of get that question. You know, a lot of people just come in, they want to transition to UX UI or product design in general, which is perfectly what the boot camp is for. But, you know, some people are particularly interested in, oh, you know, is this going to set me up for UX research or UI design specifically? But, you know, even though it isn't tailored towards that specifically, we do have a lot of people like yourself who have either gone into it straight away or very shortly after. They've maybe gone into a broader role first and then sort of specialised a little bit down one of those avenues beforehand. But it always seems to be the case that, you know, having that broader context and knowledge is helpful, even if, like, you know, you don't use Figma every day after that point. You know, having that context and being able to have those conversations are, you know, really, really helpful. Awesome. So Rob's asked, can you elaborate a little bit more on what your networking relationships look like? So you mentioned networking was obviously really important, and you sort of, besides feedback on your portfolio, what questions did you ask in your networking sort of avenues?
Yeah, so I was lucky that I was able to do some networking before COVID hit. So I was going to meetups and connecting with people I met at meetups on LinkedIn afterwards. So I think you still like attend e-meetups or, whatever they're called now, and connect with those people on LinkedIn afterwards and say, hey, I saw you at this talk about whatever, or I saw you present this UX principle. Like, I just think that kind of connection is invaluable. And then just kind of, keep up with them and follow them on LinkedIn and see what they're doing. I guess my personal connections that I made when I spoke to them, I just wanted to know about their journey. They were also all career transition people. So how did they go about it? What did they do to get their first job? Because I really believe that just getting that first job is the hardest part, because once you get that first job, you have real world experience, and you're going to have even more instances and situations to pull from to level up to get to the next place you want to be. So I think just anything you can do to get that first job, which is networking, but networking in like a very mindful way. Don't just send blanketed LinkedIn or just cold called kind of LinkedIn messages, because nobody has time for that. I think really like trying to meet people at events and connect with them to say, hey, we have this common thing that we went to together. This is who I am. And I'd love to connect with you is just like a great start.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome piece of advice. Like, even though we're living still very much in a remote world at the moment, I think there's no reason that you can't attend online events. There's a huge amount of them going on, and obviously because now we're not tied into locations, technically you can kind of attend a lot more, because you can attend ones across the country, in a different country, wherever. So I think that there's sort of no reason why that definitely can't still happen. Vivian's asked if you could share a little bit about like the interview processes that you've been through to get these roles, and how you found them in general, any pieces of advice or tips or anything.
Yeah, I would say with Camping World, it was pretty standard. A couple interviews. This was during COVID still, so over Zoom, and then I did have a take-home assignment. Camping World was a very like e-commerce focused company. So the take home was to design they just told me to design like a shoe landing page for any shoe I wanted, which was great, because then I knew like they weren't really using me. They weren't going to use my designs for their own benefit, which sometimes you run into a lot. So I knew, I was like, okay, I can design any shoe I want, the shoe landing page, whatever, they're not going to use it. So I turned that around, and then I had a couple final interviews with people in leadership. So that was pretty typical take-home challenge. I think with UX research, it was a little bit different because, like I said, I had already had experience in design at this point. It was mostly just over Zoom interviews and panel interviews. I didn't do any sort of take-home assignment for that, but that's because I had updated my portfolio with a Camping World project, so I was able to speak to that. I did a ton of research for this project, so I definitely utilized my portfolio a bit more for the UX research job interview.
Yeah. Yeah, you brought up a good point then in the beginning about how there's always a lot of conversation going on around like spec work and whether people are using it in interview processes, and so I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that actually, and and what you would recommend, how you would recommend people would navigate those situations if they do crop up in interview processes or otherwise.
Yeah, this might be a hot take, but I'm a big proponent of, there are like two seats at the table in the interview process. It is not one-sided. And I feel like especially when you're trying to transfer in design and you're like, I don't have any experience, and why would they hire me? And you're like, I'll do anything to get this interview. Like, no, people need to stop thinking like that. And so I personally think if you're asked to do something that looks like the website or the company and is very specific, I would just be cautious about that and don't spend too much time on it. I think there are ways to politely ask if they're looking to use this design that you're going to put together. If they are, you should probably be paid for it. And I don't even know what advice to give you at that point, but I think just be very careful and like really stand up for yourself and understand that like you're also interviewing them. It's not just about you working for them, getting the job and doing these design challenges so that they can do whatever with them. Like, I think you'll know when you're in that situation and you're being a bit used. So just be mindful of it, stick up for yourself, like, and also ask them tough questions and, you know, make sure they have a little skin in the game as well.
Yeah, I'm all for that perspective as well. You know, like you are interviewing in both directions. Obviously, we know, especially at the moment, you know, sometimes the job market's been particularly difficult for people, but you still don't want to be in a job where you're going to be unhappy, where it's not going to be a good fit for you. You know, you're having to massively compromise on things, you know, lifestyle and a lot of other things. So I think it's always important to ask questions and have those good vibes back in your direction. I totally agree with that. Mohammed's actually asked a really interesting question about whether you think there's like a ceiling in regards to UX research roles specifically as you move up. Like, if you progress into like a senior UX researcher, do you need more academic like background, like a master's or anything, or how is the sort of career path from here on for UX research specifically?
So yeah, that's an interesting question, which I may not know the answer to. I don't know if there is a ceiling, but what I do know is there's so many different paths in research. So you could go on like an accessibility path. Like you can get a full-time job being an expert in accessibility in terms of UX research. There's also, oh my gosh, I attended a conference a few weeks ago, and there was a woman who spoke who works actually on like an HR team. So she's like a UX researcher for the company's HR team. So it's more like kind of like human employee research. So she just focuses on how do we keep employees happy, what keeps them motivated, how do we keep them engaged, especially in a COVID world. So I thought that was super interesting. Like, how fun would that be? So there, you know, if you're interested in like moving up this ladder, I'm not sure about that, but I do know there's so many different paths you can take and hop around in UX research. It's not just interviewing people or doing usability testing all the time. There's a lot of specific things you can become an expert on.
Yeah, that's fascinating, actually. I think this is the industry in general, you know, it is obviously continuing to grow at the moment. I think people are kind of wondering, like, how is it growing so much, you know, and why is it constantly on the increase? But I think it's because, like you mentioned, it is all of the UX UI sort of umbrella roles that sit within that. They are applicable to pretty much everything. And people are now clocking on to that fact. Oh, actually, you know, we need a UX researcher for this thing that's maybe like not exactly what it was intended for at the beginning, but it, you know, it's necessary and it's super helpful to have these user-centric processes embedded in lots of different avenues of the business. Yeah, it's really, really important. I think it's just slowly being adopted by more and more companies, hence the growth of the industry. So yeah, that is really interesting context. On that note though, so in a lot of the job ads, we get this question an awful lot, understandably. They ask that, you know, people get really concerned because they say, oh, you need 2 to 3 years of experience, you know, and there's people coming in straight from UX Academy or otherwise, you know, I haven't got any years of experience, what do I do? So I just wondered if you had any like suggestions for people in those situations, and whether, you know, you were able to use your skills from your previous experience in sort of digital marketing, etc., to kind of overcome those obstacles.
Yeah, definitely. I think I always applied for jobs, even if it said 5+ years, because it's like, I have more than 5 years experience. Like I've been a professional for a very long time. And also thinking back to those skills you're bringing from your previous life, like a lot of those skills you can't teach, or you can, but it takes years. Like you know, I can teach you Figma, I can teach you some design principles, but like communicating with people, managing projects, managing your time, presenting, like those are things that you're probably doing in some capacity in your job. You put in years of experience for that. And that's something that nobody wants to teach you or has time to teach you. So when it says 5+ years, like sure, maybe you haven't been working in these design tools for 5 years, but like you have tons of years of experience. So you should apply. That's how I read it.
Absolutely. No, that's what I think the whole team always recommends that, like basically just ignore that, because every job ad says it anyway. And basically every single person coming out of UX Academy has got a job that said that in the job role. Just apply for it anyway. You have got experience. You just need to think about what that is, even if it isn't like Figma experience. And there's been a few jokes going around, they've asked for 10 plus years of experience in this tool. And it's like, well, the tool's only been around for 6 years. So how is that? That's not even possible. So, always take these things with a pinch of salt, because normally it's not a requirement. It's a very much a nice to have, and we would just always recommend that you apply anyway. Erica's asked, how much quantitative or like maths background do you need, or do you think you use in your job as a UX researcher?
I use it pretty often. I've kind of, since I started, I've taken on a lot of the data analytics to-dos for the team, right? So our designers should be using data to help them make decisions. Right now, designers don't have time. They don't have time to go into Google Analytics, or we also use this platform called Looker to pull reports. So I've taken that on. So I'm kind of the go-to for any reporting needs at this point. So yeah, but that's also something I took from my client services position. I was constantly, manipulating data and reporting for my clients in the past. So that's something that I'm used to doing. So I'm like, cool, I'll take that on and I'll be the data expert. I mean, I wouldn't call myself an expert yet, but like, that's my job now. So I'm like setting up reporting for the designers. It's not on a weekly basis, but definitely on like a monthly or quarterly basis, even just looking at like what device types our users are using the most, where are they coming from, and things like that. So I would say, yeah, definitely a significant amount of data to be looked at.
Yeah, that's interesting. But I think, it just highlights that transferable skills is just super, super important. Just moving a little bit towards your portfolio now. I was just wondering if, you have updated your portfolio now, you've moved more into the research side of things. Do you think that UX UI design versus UX research portfolios do look different, or should they look different in that regard?
I don't think they should look that different. I mean, I personally think the portfolio that should look the most different is if you really want to be a UI designer. If you want to be visually focused, then I think your portfolio should not look like mine. Like mine is, you can tell mine is very research focused, and I like to tell you about all the steps. And like I said, like I kind of like pack a lot more into the front half of the process rather than the back half. But if you're saying, oh, I might want to be a generalist, or I might want to do research, then I think those portfolios should pretty much look the same, because how can you design without doing any research and analyzing it and reading it and coming up with insights from it? So, am I going to be a researcher for the rest of my career? I don't know. I totally love it, but I don't think I will personally probably pigeonhole myself or my portfolio to just be research focused right now. Sure, I might put a case study in there where I was the researcher and somebody else was the designer, but I don't know. I don't think that they should look that different, personally.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. And I think that point that you made about like, how can you do this if you haven't done the research first? I think it's very important. I was actually chatting to some students last week. I'm in the UX research module at the moment, and I just really want to get back to the UI stuff. But it's like, no, take your time with the UX research, because it's really important. It is in depth. There's a lot of different methodologies and all sorts that you've got to get stuck into. But you can't end up with the solution that you're thinking of unless you have the research to back it up, first of all. So anyone that's in the boot club at the moment, please do take your time through the research stuff, because it is really important. Back to the portfolios though, someone's asked, do you recommend that like portfolios should have like a minimum amount of projects in them before you apply for jobs?
Yeah, I think like 3 is the magic number. But if you're like, in phase 2 and you see a really cool job and you only have one in your portfolio, like apply for it. Like, of course, don't wait until you have 3 perfect case studies. But I do think 3 is like a solid number.
Yeah, that's what it seems to be like an industry magic number somehow. It's like 3 is the minimum, and then you sort of go from there. Awesome. So a little bit more about I know I'm hopping around a little bit. I'm just trying to navigate people's questions to make sure we're getting through as many of them as we can. Another thing that we sort of wanted to ask you about a little bit more was your day-to-day at Nat Geo Learning. Sort of what does your day-to-day look like there now? Like, who does your team consist of? Who do you work with mostly, and how does that all go?
Yeah, so for my team, I work really closely with my manager. She's the manager of UX research and strategy. So basically my position is a brand new position because she just didn't have time to do research anymore, because she's more like strategy and kind of planning. So we work very closely together. But yeah, I'm taking a lot of that research off her plate so it can actually be done. And then there's 2 or 3 UX designers, and then about 5 or 6 what we call more creative designers or art directors, because at Nat Geo Learning we still have our print focused textbook products and then the digital products. Obviously we all work on the digital products, but print and digital need to still look very similar to each other. So we still have like print designers on our team as well. So we all work really closely together. And I would say in my day-to-day, it's like honestly different, but I guess I can tell you about my most recent project was I did a lot of accessibility testing with blind and low vision users, which was really fun. And I learned so much. So we're working on, making sure that we so you can meet the guidelines of web content accessibility, but that doesn't mean that your product is usable. So what I was working on was figuring out how to make it more usable. So I was testing users who were relying on screen readers and Braille devices to navigate the website. So I just recently completed that. So with that, I wrote the whole research plan. I wrote out the tasks that I was going to have them go through, both on the student side, so acting like they were a student, and then also acting like they were a teacher. And then, synthesizing what happened during those sessions, and then identifying what needed to be fixed to make the whole flows more accessible for users, specifically on screen readers. So that was like a big project that I just wrapped up.
That sounds awesome. Like, I think we do get like quite a lot of questions like, what about accessibility for design, and all that type of stuff. So I think it's fascinating that this is being more widely adopted. I think, that the industry is moving in that direction in general, not only in regards to inclusivity, but in other directions, especially like having accessible products is like, it has to be done these days. You can't get away with it of not doing that. So I think that must have been such a fascinating project to work on. Either to do with that or just in general UX research, are there any specific tools that you particularly like or that you use a lot, or that you'd recommend that people take a look at if they are interested in that type of work?
Tools. I mean, I'm not using anything that I didn't use in UX Academy. I mean, I've used Google Forms for surveys is great, especially from an accessibility standpoint. So I use that a lot for my surveys. I'm doing, Zoom usability testing and recording them. And I'm having my manager scribe for me. So she's taking notes while I'm leading the whole thing, which is kind of what happened during UX Academy. I might have to think about that one a little bit more, but I can't think of any tool I think is like that we're going above and beyond that isn't accessible to everybody.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair enough, and I think that it's a good way to answer the question, because I think sometimes you can really easily overthink that tool wise. I think people are, oh, the tools, they jump straight into the tools. It's like, it's not just about that, and there are really easy solutions that you can just pick up and use for free, like really easy. They're very accessible, like you mentioned. It's not, and it really isn't all about that at the end of the day. It's more about the process behind it, and making sure you're doing everything correctly in that regard. But yeah, in regards to sort of UX research specifically, do you have any recommendations for people who have that as their goal, their end goal? Either they want to go through a UX UI bootcamp and then eventually get into UX research and just go for it straight away. Do you have any recommendations for people in that regard?
Yeah, I think like we talked about earlier, just make sure your portfolio reflects that. Obviously, there's a science to writing these case studies. Even though you want to go into research, that doesn't mean you need to write like tons and tons of paragraphs about your research, but there's a really good balance between, explaining what you did and in a very quick and concise way. On my portfolio, I kind of, I think when I did interviews, I just did a quick snapshot of my interviews, like in my case study, but I link out to like the full interview report. So that's where I have all my questions, who I interviewed, how long the interviews were, things like that aren't necessarily important for somebody who's visiting my case study to see right away. But if they're interested in my research work, like one click takes them out to a separate page on my site where they can read that full report. So there's things like that you can do if you're interested in portraying a research focus without making your case studies like all, very text heavy instead of being so visual.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really good advice. I mean, people, the portfolio is all important, and I think there's a lot of different ways that you can go about it, but I think there's some really good tips there that people can definitely bear in mind. Just a really nice question here from Julie, who asked, because you mentioned your team structure, who you work closely with, and she actually asked, like, as a researcher, do you now ever meet or work directly with developers? Because she's actually a front end developer herself, but loves UX UI, and would just she'd love to actually find a company that has opportunities for her to work more with the UX UI designers. So I was wondering, because you're right at the research end, do you still have that interaction, or is that now other team members that have those responsibilities?
Yeah, I do actually. We use Jira for project work for developers. So a lot of those Jira tickets come from myself and my manager. So they're hitting us up all the time with questions. So I definitely still work with developers to, clarify things. And I would say we still have a really close relationship with them.
Awesome. That's really, really good to hear. And we'll just do a few final questions and then we'll wrap up. So thank you. I want to say quickly, thank you to everyone who submitted all these questions. These have been amazing. Nicole's asked, seeing as UX is a newer department, I don't know how Nat Geo look at UX and how important it's deemed from their side of things, but they really believe that they should, UX team members should be in the room when making enterprise decisions. How is that positioned in Nat Geo Learning at the moment? Is there a seat at the sort of senior level for your team members, or how are you finding that?
Yeah, so I would say UX is still very new at National Geographic Learning. I think they hired the first designer maybe 2 years ago. So it is still new, but for example, the powers that be at National Geographic Learning are working on the 3 to 5 year plan right now for the product. And they have come to the UX team for insights on some specific things that they want to confirm, should we do this in our product or not. So I'm very lucky in that they recognize our importance and our value. I've been kind of digging through old research reports that happened way before I started, but pulling insights to say, okay, this is what our students need to learn. This is what our teachers need to teach. And this is based on research we've already done. So are we sitting at the table with leadership every day? No, but when it comes to making big decisions, they definitely rely on us to give them a lot of those insights, which is great.
That's fascinating. Yeah, that is, I can't believe that they've only just started hiring UX team members just a couple of years ago. It's amazing that they are, obviously can realizing the value already, but I think obviously it takes time to properly embed these processes and realize the full value of what you're doing, I imagine. So but it's awesome that's already started to happen. Awesome. Okay, well, I think we'll leave it there. We've definitely grilled Mary enough. I'm hopefully you've got a lot of great insights and information about, you know, what she's doing now, her journey through UX Academy. We're going to be, there's a few people that have asked about whether there's going to be a recording of this, and there definitely will be, and we will post it on both our blog and on YouTube, so you can watch it back and see Mary chat about through things again if you want to, you know, cover any bits over a second time. But I just want to say thank you so much, Mary, on behalf of myself and the rest of the team and everyone watching. We really, really appreciate having you online with us today to learn a little bit about your journey and you know, the advice that you have for everyone that's interested in learning a little bit more. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with us quickly before we wrap up?
No, just like good luck to everybody. And if you're ever interested, my group crits are on Wednesdays and Saturdays. So hope to see you at one of them soon. And yeah, thanks for joining.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. As Mary mentioned, please do check out her Group Crits if you are currently in the Academy program. And feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. If you're someone that's thinking about like transitioning to UX UI, you can reach us on admissions@trydesignlab.com if you have any questions. You can also book in a call. But thank you so much to everyone for attending. We'll post this recording on our channel shortly, and we hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.